Alright guys, so last night Israel fully disintegrated whatever remaining shreds of the Gaza ceasefire remained as they engaged in a widespread bombing campaign essentially all over the Gaza Strip in what has resulted at this point, from what we know so far, over 400 deaths, including scores of innocent women and children. So we're going to get to the latest reporting here from Dropsite News. Jeremy Scahill and Abu Bakr Abed, who is one of their contributors, who's actually on the ground in Gaza right now, and he gives his testimony. And then we're also going to follow up on Trump's continued bombing campaign in Yemen, as well as his new attacks on Iran, essentially threatening or saber-rattling for war. Now, we start off here again, Dropsite News reporting what exactly happened last night. They say the U.S.-backed Israeli government resumed its intense genocidal attacks on Gaza early Tuesday morning, unleashing a massive wave of indiscriminate military strikes across the Strip and killing more than 410 people, including scores of women and children, according to local health officials. They say the massacre resulted in one of the largest single-day death tolls of the past 17 months and also killed several members of Gaza's government and a member of Hamas's political bureau. They say the Trump administration said that it was briefed ahead of the strikes, which began at approximately 2 a.m. local time, and that the U.S. fully supports Israel's attacks, which of course is nothing new. The U.S. has been totally and completely complicit in this genocide from day one, arming and funding and giving diplomatic cover to Israel under the Biden administration and now under the Trump administration, who is just ramping it up even further. Now, they continue with a quote here from Abu Bakr Abed saying that the sky was filled with drones, quadcopters, helicopters, F-16 and F-35 warplanes. The firing from the tanks and vehicles didn't stop. He says, I didn't sleep last night. I had a pang in my heart that something awful would happen. At 2 a.m., I tried to close my eyes, but once it happened, 4 explosions shook my home. The sky turned red and became heavily shrouded with plumes of smoke. And they continue down here saying that the Israeli attacks pummeled cities across Gaza, from Rafah in the south and Khan Yunis to Deir al-Balah in the center and Gaza City in the north, where Israel carried out some of the heaviest bombing in areas already reduced to an apocalyptic landscape. Now, I mean, at this point, if you've seen the pictures, some of which I've shown on this channel, of what Gaza looks like today, it's genuinely hard to imagine what you could possibly still be bombing. At this point, you're just bouncing the rubble and taking out scores of innocent civilians in the process. Now, they continue saying that since the ceasefire took effect in January, more than 500,000 Palestinians returned to the north, and many of them have been living in makeshift shelters or on the rubble of their former homes. These are the kinds of places that Israel is bombing right now. They say that hospitals that already suffer from catastrophic damage from 16 months of relentless Israeli attacks and a dire lack of medical supplies struggle to handle the influx of wounded people, and local authorities issued an emergency call for blood donations. And I'm going to show you a video here in a second of an Australian medic who's inside Gaza right now who details just how catastrophic the situation is. They say that late Tuesday morning, Dr. Abdul Qadir Washa, a senior emergency doctor at Al-Adha Hospital in the Al-Nusrayat camp in central Gaza, described the situation saying, "We've just received another influx of injuries following a nearby strike. We've dealt with them. We are just preparing ourselves for more casualties as more bombings are expected to happen," he told Dropsite, saying, "Since the morning, we were horrified and awoke to the screams of pain of people. We've been treating many people, children and women in particular," which is, of course, nothing new. A huge bulk, in fact, an outright majority of the people that Israel has killed so far in this genocide have been women and children. They also say that Washa said that they have had to transfer some of the people to other hospitals because of a lack of medical supplies, saying, "We don't have the means. Gaza's hospitals are devoid of everything. Here at the hospital, we lack everything, including basic necessities like disinfectants, and gauze. We don't have enough beds for the casualties. We don't have the capacity to treat the wounded. X-ray devices, magnetic resonance imaging, and simple things like stitches are not available. The hospital is in an unprecedented state of chaos. The number of medical crews is not enough. Overwhelmed with injuries, we're horrified, and we don't know why we are speaking to the world. We're working with less than the bare minimum in our hands. We need doctors, devices, and supplies, and circumstances to do our job." Finishing off saying every minute a wounded person dies due to a lack of resources. And of course, this is coming in the context of Israel just a few weeks ago completely cutting off all supplies from getting into Gaza, all humanitarian aid, as well as restricting electricity as well. So they have compounded, not only dropping bombs on people's heads and blowing limbs off, but you're also making the situation for the doctors trying to save some of those civilians impossible because they do not have the supplies. And even before this most recent total and complete blockade of all humanitarian aid, Israel had already been restricting the supplies from getting into Gaza to a very significant degree, to the point where the hospitals were already in a dire situation. Now it's even worse at this point. Now they continue, they say Dr. Zahir al-Wahidi, the director of the information unit at the Ministry of Health in Gaza, told Dropsite that 174 children and 89 women were killed in the Israeli attacks. And again, this is just so far. They say local health officials and witnesses said that the death toll is expected to rise dramatically because dozens of people are believed to be buried under the rubble of these structures where they were sleeping when the bombing began. And they got a quote here saying, "We can hear the voices of the victims under the rubble, but we can't save them," according to a medical official at Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. They say video posted on social media by Palestinians inside Gaza portrayed unspeakable scenes of the lifeless bodies of infants and small children being killed in the bombings. And I was debating showing you guys some of the images that have been flooding my feed over the last day, but I genuinely couldn't find many pictures that I could show on YouTube without the video getting taken down. That's how catastrophic the situation is. Just an endless stream of children, of innocent little children who have been blown to shreds by last night's bombing. It is as horrific as you could possibly imagine. So much so that, again, I don't even think that I can show you guys the images on my channel. Now, they continue here. They say Israeli officials said that they had been given a green light by President Donald Trump to resume heavy bombing of Gaza because of Hamas's refusal to obey Trump's directive to release all Israeli captives immediately, saying, quote, "All those who seek to terrorize not just Israel, but also the United States of America will see a price to pay," said the White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt on Fox, saying all hell will break loose. I'm going to show you guys this clip of her in a minute because it's just completely insane. But I mean, again, green light from President Donald Trump, of course, and blaming Hamas for not immediately releasing all of the hostages, even though it was Israel that just torched a ceasefire framework that was already set for all of the hostages alive and dead to be returned to Israel. So there was already a plan in place to do what he's telling Hamas to do, and then Israel violated that deal. They refused to move forward to phase 2. They asked for a new deal. And then when Hamas wouldn't agree to allowing Israel to indefinitely occupy Gaza, then they turn around and they cut off the humanitarian aid. So the idea that this is about the hostages is just completely ridiculous. There was already a plan in place for that. Israel ripped it to shreds. Okay, so let's stop the bullshit of pretending like Israel desperately wants to get their hostages back and that's why they're indiscriminately bombing all across Gaza. That's not the case. Okay, and we know that in the past, Israel has killed many of their own hostages as a part of this genocide inside of Gaza. Now, they continue saying that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement asserting that Israel will from now on act against Hamas with increasing military strength, right? Because you haven't been doing that so far, I guess. They say that Israeli media reported that the decision to resume heavy strikes against Gaza was made a week ago and was not in response to any imminent threat posed by Hamas. Israel, which has repeatedly violated the ceasefire that went into effect on January 19th, has sought to create new terms in a transparent effort to justify blowing up the deal entirely. And this is exactly what they have done repeatedly over and over and over again. Even if you guys go and watch my coverage from when this ceasefire was initially put into place back in January, this is the exact thing that we were all warning about. That inevitably Israel was going to throw a wrench into the works and blow up the ceasefire deal entirely and then resume the genocide. It's exactly what we all, could see happening in the future. It's not difficult to predict because, again, they've done it before, right? And from the beginning, they made it very clear that they didn't want any long-term peace. They didn't want to pull out from Gaza. They didn't want to end the occupation. They want to exterminate the Palestinian population there. That's their goal. And also Trump's goal as well, because he's been coming out making these statements about the U.S. taking ownership of Gaza and completely ethnically cleansing the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. So they're not, making it difficult to foresee what their goals are. They're pretty explicit about it. They continue, they say, here from Muhammad Hadi, the UN humanitarian coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territories. He says, "This is unconscionable. A ceasefire must be reinstated immediately. People in Gaza have endured unimaginable suffering, and compounding the crisis in Gaza's hospitals, Israel recently began again blocking the entry of international medical workers to the Strip at an unprecedented rate as part of a sweeping new policy that severely limits the number of aid organizations that Israel will permit to operate in Gaza." And of course, that comes with the other backdrop of Israel repeatedly targeting and killing aid workers as well. They finish off down here saying that last night, after the attacks were underway, the Israeli military posted messages on social media in Arabic, ordering Palestinians in areas throughout the Strip to evacuate to areas Israel claims will be designated as safe zones. And of course, throughout the war, Israel has repeatedly bombed areas where it told Palestinians to flee to these so-called safe zones. They say these orders, which also declare large areas along Gaza's border with Israel no-go zones for Palestinians, indicate that Israel may be considering redeploying its ground forces deeper into the eastern area of Gaza. And so this is the map with the message that they put out in Arabic, showing here in the red, I guess, what they're defining as their no-go zones. But again, it's not like they haven't been bombing inside of these other areas as well. I mean, again, they were bombing in Khan Yunis and Deir al-Balah and in Rafah and in Gaza City. So they've already been bombing within these areas that are supposedly the safe zones, right? Last thing here, and then we'll move on. Israel starves and then it kills children. They say since it signed the ceasefire deal with Hamas on January 17th, Netanyahu has waged a campaign of sabotage and provocation, openly violating the terms of the agreement by hindering or outright blocking the delivery of aid into the Gaza Strip. While food and other supplies were permitted to enter Gaza throughout the first 42-day phase of the deal, Israel refused to allow almost any of the 60,000 mobile homes and only a fraction of the 200,000 tents to enter Gaza. They say Israel also continued to conduct drone strikes and other military attacks in Gaza throughout the ceasefire, killing at least 130 Palestinians. So, I mean, does this sound like a ceasefire? Like, does this sound like this was ever real to you guys? When you sign an agreement, you then proceed to violate basically every single tenet of the agreement. You continue to kill people. You continue to bomb. That's not a ceasefire. What Israel means by a ceasefire is we get to fire and you cease the firing. That's what they mean. Right? So we'll finish off there. Again, great reporting here from Dropsite News. I'm glad that they exist because, as I'll show you guys here in just a minute, the Western reporting on this has been absolutely abysmal. Just a complete fucking joke. So to have independent outlets like this, especially with direct testimony from somebody who is on the ground in Gaza and can explain what's going on from his perspective, like, this is actual independent, real journalism. So highly recommend you guys go and, sign up for Dropsite. It's completely free and they do great work over there. Now, moving on, we also had Dropsite, again, posting this direct testimony from an Australian medic, Mohammed Mustafa, who was describing some of his experience over the last day.
We've worked throughout the entire night. We haven't stopped. The bombing has been non-stop. We've run out of ketamine. We've run out of propofol. We've run out of all painkillers. We can't sedate anyone. We can't give them any analgesia. When we intubate people, they wake up and they're choking because we have no sedation. There are 7 girls getting their legs amputated, no anesthesia. The bombing is still going on. The room is still shaking. I haven't slept. We went to bed at about 1 o'clock and at 1:30 the bombing started. It's about 10 a.m. now. Just gone back to my room. I'm lightheaded, I'm dizzy, and I mean, it was just mostly women and children, burnt head to toe, limbs missing, heads missing. There's a video I put up on my story of me doing a chest drain. The gentleman that did the chest drain, and he died on the way to the CT scan. There's another video of 3 girls laying on a bed. That's his 3 girls, who are now orphaned. Their mother didn't even make it into the hospital. She was killed along with their other sister. I don't know what to tell you. I was here in June. Nothing to this intensity. This is unbelievable, and the bombing is still going on. The rooms are still shaking. The screams are everywhere. It's insane. I need to just take 15 minutes, or even an hour, just to rest, to go back in there and go back down again. I feel awful to leave, but I've been there all night and I haven't stopped, and my legs are shaking, and I feel dizzy and lightheaded. The smell of burnt flesh is still in my nose.
genuinely unbelievable courage that it takes for guys like this to go to Gaza and to put themselves in this kind of a situation. I mean, it's literally hell on earth. I mean, he's describing how not only are they overwhelmed and under-resourced and understaffed and under continued bombing, but you have, children, you have innocent civilians who are showing up with horrifying injuries, limbs being blown off, shrapnel, all of these different things. And because they don't have the resources, they don't have anesthesia, right? You have people getting amputations without anesthesia. Think about that. This is what the US and Israel are subjecting fucking children to right now. Okay? And we're supposedly the good guys in this situation. And again, he emphasizes here that what he's seeing is mostly women and children, not Hamas militants, not anything like that. Women and children who are being blown to bits. Disgusting. We also had here a reminder from Mohammed Shahada that even before this, Israel was not abiding by the ceasefire drops. I touched on that a little bit, but just to expand on it, they say since the ceasefire was agreed to, they never started phase 2 negotiations that were supposed to be scheduled back on February 6th. They killed over 150 Gazans during the ceasefire, including 400 today. They never allowed caravans, bulldozers, or trucks into Gaza. They violated the agreement over 960 times. They allowed less than 30% of the fuel that was supposed to enter. They heavily restricted the evacuation of the wounded and seriously ill Gazans. They banned all Gazans stuck in Egypt and abroad from returning. They cut off all food, water, and electricity since March 2nd. They arrested 762 Palestinians in February after releasing about the same number in the same month. So, I mean, keep in mind, like, Israel is also holding thousands of Palestinians hostage that they've abducted from Gaza and from the West Bank. And that's part of what was supposed to be the hostage exchange, right? Hamas releases Israeli hostage in exchange for Israel releasing Palestinian hostages. But what Israel's doing is, as they're releasing some of the Palestinian hostages, they're just going and arresting more, right? They say they killed Palestinian captives after their release. They murdered Palestinian hostages in captivity, and they restricted the work of UN agencies in Gaza. Now, we also have here from Mohammed Shahada pointing out an Israeli journalist, Yuri Mizgav, who predicted hours before this bombing campaign that this was going to happen, that Netanyahu would imminently resume the genocide in Gaza because, quote, everything is closing in on him. Corruption trial, wife under investigation, national crisis, budget crisis, renewed mass protests. So this is another factor within all of this is Benjamin Netanyahu's self-protection politically to keep himself in power, maybe to encourage Itamar Ben-Gvir to come back to the government to, allow him to remain in the position that he is and to protect himself from any sort of consequences or accountability. Now, again, we had this Caroline Levitt clip here over on Fox News. Let's go ahead and watch this real quick.
Well, the Trump administration and the White House were consulted by the Israelis on their attacks in Gaza tonight. And as President Trump has made it clear, Hamas, the Houthis, Iran, all those who seek to terrorize not just Israel, but also the United States of America, will see a price to pay. All hell will break loose. And all of the terrorists in the Middle East, again, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, Iranian-backed terror proxies, and Iran themselves should take President Trump very seriously when he says he is not afraid to stand for law-abiding people. He is not afraid to stand up for the United States of America and our friend and our ally Israel. And we know that these successful defensive strikes that took place over the weekend against the Houthis in the Red Sea were indeed successful. We took out some of their leaders, and the Defense Department is set to continue with this campaign if the Houthis continue with their retaliatory measures. The president is going to stand for the navigation, freedom of navigation of our seas, which is a very basic principle that unfortunately the previous administration refused to stand for, and that's why we are in this mess in the Middle East in the first place. President Trump inherited a lot of...
Okay, just so much wrong with that, starting off with the ludicrous claim that Israel is a law-abiding people, the same country that has been accused of genocide at the International Criminal Court, that the United Nations has accused of genocide. I mean, we could go through a list of about 200, 300 various crimes that Israel has been accused of committing inside of Gaza, inside of the West Bank, not to mention that they're illegally occupying the Palestinian people on top of that, still, illegally occupying the Golan Heights. Probably one of the least, legal acting nation states in the entire world, honestly. So that we can kind of just cast aside as a ridiculous statement from her. Beyond that, she says that the strikes against the Houthis are these wildly successful strikes. Guys, you got to keep in mind, not only was the Joe Biden administration bombing inside of Yemen before Trump took office again, but even Biden, when he was doing that bombing, was asked whether or not the strikes are going to be effective in terms of preventing the Houthis from doing this blockade in the Red Sea against Israeli ships. And Biden admitted, no, they're not going to work. It's not going to do anything. We're just kind of going to continue doing it, right? As a show of strength because we're macho or whatever the fuck. And that's exactly why Trump is doing it as well. But the strikes are not going to work. The people of Yemen have been bombed for a decade straight now, both by the U.S. and by Saudi Arabia before that. The idea that they're now going to somehow fold under this Trump administration bombing pressure campaign is just completely ridiculous. It's not going to happen. They're not going to be successful. And she continues to, echoing Trump, threaten Iran as well in this process. Now, we continue. Again, to give you a comparison point, we just had that great reporting over by Drop Site with Jeremy and Abu Bakr. And just as a comparison point for what the rest of the Western media is saying about all of this, here from CNN. I mean, this is just a sick joke, guys. Their top line here is, Israel says it is conducting extensive strikes against Hamas in Gaza, throwing doubt on the fragile ceasefire. Throwing doubt on the fragile ceasefire. They just killed over 400 people in one night. That's throwing doubt on the sea. Think about if this was in the reverse. If Hamas launched a bunch of rockets at Israel and killed over 400 Israelis in one night, do you think that Israel would be saying anything other than Hamas just committed a brutal war crime and is completely disintegrating the ceasefire? No, of course. That's exactly how they would talk about it, right? But when it comes to Israel, they can kill hundreds and hundreds of people, right? And keep in mind, the videos I'm seeing are not Hamas militants. They're women and children mostly, right? So, I mean, the idea that they can just bomb hundreds of innocent people and that's viewed as like, oh, maybe it's throwing doubt on the ceasefire. What are we talking about? Now, another one here from the New York Times. They said it was unclear whether the strikes effectively ended the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Really, it's unclear. It's unclear. Think about, again, if this was in the reverse. How would they be talking about this? If Hamas had just killed 400 Israelis overnight. Think they'd be saying it's unclear, it's mystifying what's happening right now? They literally are incapable of holding Israel accountable for anything. For anything. They can never be held at fault. Now, we also have, again, moving on a little bit to Yemen and Iran here to finish off the video, a statistic posted here by Jeremy Scahill that the U.S. Navy has used more missiles for air defense since combat operations against the Houthi naval blockade in the Red Sea off the Yemeni coast began in October of 2023 than it used in all years since Operation Desert Storm in the 1990s. 30 years, okay? We've used more missile defense in just over a year, basically, against the Houthis than we have in 30 years prior to that, since Operation Desert Storm. Absolutely insane. Now, again, keep in mind, we're doing all of this for what exactly? Like, why are the Houthis in Yemen doing a blockade right now? Okay, they're not doing it for fun. They're not doing it as some sort of an imperial conquest. They're doing it to try to pressure Israel to stop blocking the aid from getting into Gaza and to stop the genocide in Gaza. It's very explicit what they're doing here. How do we know that it's explicit? Well, because when the ceasefire was signed in January, they stopped. And they did that even before that when there were temporary pauses in the fighting. So we know that the Houthis could stop this blockade immediately if Trump and Israel were willing to stop the genocide in Gaza, were willing to stop starving the people of Gaza. That would instantly fix this situation in the Red Sea. But instead of doing that, we're going to continue to starve the people of Gaza. We're going to continue to bomb the people of Gaza, continue to push forward with an ethnic cleansing plan of the people of Gaza. And then we're also going to launch effectively a war against Yemen. One that is, again, an illegal war because it hasn't been authorized by Congress. Nice anti-war president that we got here, right? Remember when conservatives were claiming that Trump is an anti-war president? Now, We also had this Truth Social from Trump himself, again, threatening war with Iran here. He says, "Let nobody be fooled. The hundreds of attacks being made by Houthi, the sinister mobsters and thugs based in Yemen, who are hated by the Yemeni people, all emanate from and are created by Iran." That's just fundamentally not true, just to make things clear. Like, yes, Iran does back the Houthis, right? They have sort of they're allies of sorts, right? And Iran does give them some degree of material support, but the Houthis are their own group, right? They don't exist purely as like some puppet for Iran that Iran is pulling the strings on and coordinating every single one of their moves. That's not the case at all. In fact, Iran, especially since October of 2023, in the October 7th attacks, Iran has gotten angry in multiple circumstances with the Houthis over some of the actions that they have taken. So they're not just puppets of Iran, and Iran should be held responsible for everything that they do. It's not true. Now, he continues, he says, "Any further attack or retaliation by the Houthis will be met with great force, and there is no guarantee that the force will stop there. Iran has played the innocent victim of rogue terrorists from which they've lost control, but they haven't lost control. They're dictating every move, giving them weapons, supplying them with money and highly sophisticated military equipment, and even so-called intelligence. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran, and Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences, and those consequences will be dire." So there's no other way to interpret this other than this is Trump threatening an imminent war with Iran. He's saying if the Houthis continue with their blockade, which everything that we know so far indicates they're going to, then the U.S. is going to view that as a direct attack by Iran, and that we will impose dire consequences on them. This is Trump threatening to get us into another drawn-out, pointless, bloody, destructive war in the Middle East. That's exactly what this is. And again, all for what? So that Israel can keep doing a genocide? That's what this is all for. We're going to go to war with Iran on behalf of Israel's right to starve the people of Gaza. Now, we also had this article that I'll link down below from Ken Klippenstein. Not going to get into the entirety of it, but his headline is, "Trump is now at war with Iran. Let's call this what it is." And he details some other, specific instances. Specifically, he's talking about the U.S. working with Israel with B-52 heavy bombers flying from Qatar to Iraq, and basically that this is an explicit message to the neighboring Iran, whose state media warned that the B-52s are nuclear-capable bombers carrying a message whose recipient was clear as day, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and basically doing this as sort of like a flex to Iran and a warning that we have nuclear-capable planes in the region, and we're going to fly them by you as a warning shot that this may be coming your way in the imminent future. So recommend you guys go and subscribe to Ken Klippenstein as well. He does great reporting. We also had this previous statement that he highlighted from Trump just a few weeks ago, saying that, "I hope you're going to negotiate talking to Iran, because if we have to go in militarily, it's going to be a terrible thing with them." So, Trump is the one who pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal that was signed under Obama, and that Iran was following in perfect accordance with, right? According to international observers. Trump pulls out of that. He rips up the deal. He doesn't get a new one. He escalates with Iran with the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. And then now he comes back to office, and he's basically imposing like a maximum pressure strategy on Iran, as if that's going to work to any extent, and threatening that if you don't get back into a nuclear deal, as if we are a country that can be trusted in these deals, right? Then potentially we're going to go to war with you. That's the pretty explicit threat that Trump is making here. And the backdrop of this, of course, and I'll finish the video off with this. It's a long one, guys, but we have John Mearsheimer calling out the fact that the detention and disappearance and deportation of Mahmoud Khalil, the Palestinian student protester at Columbia University, exposes that the truth is that the greatest threat to freedom of speech in the U.S. right now is Israel and its supporters, which it's hard to disagree with that, guys. Again, we have the U.S. government not only trying to deport people who are legal permanent residents here. In the case of Mahmoud Khalil, somebody with a green card, explicitly for speech that he was engaging in that's critical of U.S. foreign policy, critical of Israel. But we also have the Trump administration withholding, hundreds of millions of dollars in funding to Columbia and to other universities because he doesn't view that they're cracking down on what he calls anti-Semitism enough. And by anti-Semitism, he means, again, criticism of Israel. You know, we also have the Trump DOJ threatening to launch an investigation into the student protesters for acts of terrorism. I mean, this is as anti-free speech as it gets. And they're doing it under the guise of fighting anti-Semitism. But of course, that's very obviously not what it's about. It's about crushing any and all dissent, specifically on the issue of Israel. But also, it's not going to stay with that, guys. Because if he can do this for Israel, then he could do it for whatever he wants, for anybody who's critical of the Trump administration, of anything that he does. So I'll leave you guys off with that. We also had reports that Israel was bombing inside of Syria and Lebanon. So we have Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, invasion of the West Bank, ethnic cleansing in the West Bank as well. We have Trump bombing the Houthis in Yemen, and we also have him threatening war with Iran. So I guess the only way that it could possibly get worse and escalate from here is if Trump actually gets into a direct war with Iran. I guess hoping that doesn't happen, but it is pretty much as bad as it gets right now, guys.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying